Welcome to another DragonLance Saga review episode. It is Kirinor Holmeswelt the 24th. My name is Adam, and today I'm going to give you my review of DL3, Dragons of Hope, by Tracy Hickman. I would like to take a moment and thank the DL Saga members and Patreon patrons and invite you to consider becoming a member of Patreon. You can even pick up Dragonlance Media or get $10 signing up to start playing .games using my affiliate links. You can also pick up Dragons of Ash and Twilight free from dlsaga.com. Just go over there and check it out. And if you read it, give us a review. We'd appreciate it. All right, so this is my perspective. If yours differs, that's okay. Share your thoughts in the live YouTube chat or in the comments if you're watching this after the fact. Always love hearing what other people say about different modules or books or source books or whatever. It's always nice to have a little bit of that back and forth. The way these typically work is there's a pre-written review that I put together. I didn't do that, and I don't normally do that for modules or source books. There's just not like a standalone narrative, because especially with modules, it's entirely up to what the players do that the narrative is wrapped around. And so instead, I just sort of talk through it and give you my thoughts. So with DL3 Dragons of Hope, again, it was released originally back in September of 1984. So this was before Unearthed Arcana. Basically what we had was the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual 1 and 2, and Fiend Folio. And what you found, interestingly, is that you've got pieces pulled from both Monster Manual 2 and Fiend Folio, not just in Dragonlance in general, but because, of course, Death Knights and Skeletal Warriors, but also Shadow Dragons. And this is actually something that I was not aware of. I've never run this module before. I'm gearing up to run it because we're sort of at our halfway point or just after our halfway point in my DL2 game. And so the next module I'm going to run is, of course, DL3. And so I needed to read through it to make sure I had my hands around it. And it is different than the other two preceding it. Now, this would be the third of 4 modules that are really meant to be the first book, Dragons of Autumn, Twilight, and the Chronicles. Although, if you actually look at the second and third and ultimately the fourth book, it does not include content that is actually in the novels. And this is actually what I was going to be talking about originally when I had a Dragonlance Hangout scheduled for today until I finished this. The reality is the novels are dramatically different than the modules. Like, dramatically different. And before I went in through and started reading all of these modules, I thought it was different enough because even Margaret Weiss made a note about it, that, you know, they intentionally made them different so that you wouldn't spoil the module if you read the novels. That doesn't stop people from trying to correlate the two and trying to use justifications or experiences from the novels to inform their characters' decisions or actions in the game. Now, that's inevitable, especially now after the fact, after 40 years. Of course, people are going to do that. So I don't shame anyone for that. We read the novels. We love them. We want to relive those experiences, of course. What it does, though, is it sets you up for expectations that are not then delivered. For example, the biggest one, in my experience, that is Verminaard and having to face his incredibly powerful red dragon, Ember or Pyros. You don't ever fight Verminaard in DL2 when you go into Pax Tharkas and rescue the slaves. The point of DL2 is to be a buffer. Not only are you rescuing Lorana and a bunch of slaves from northern Abanasinia, but you're also providing cover so that the Colonisti can flee while the dragon army is actively chasing them. So you're supposed to be a distraction more than anything else. With that in mind, you're never meant to face off against Verminaard. In fact, he's supposed to be such an insurmountable force that even if you did face off against him, you probably wouldn't win. And in the rare off chance that you did win, it has to have an mysterious death. And that's because Verminaard is in this module, DL3, and DL4. That's right. He is a persistent threat that continues. So, because we know the novels are different and players' expectations are going to be subverted if they think that it's going to be the same, they're going to be presented with opportunities that actually, if they follow them, would benefit them. But because it's not in the novel, a lot of players don't choose to follow those. One really great example is going to Haven. A lot of players playing through DL1 don't end up going to Haven. And that's unfortunate because it's a really big part of the game world, but it's also a huge story beat that is really interesting to explore. And then, of course, Darkenwood is pretty much up in the air as well because they meet the old man in the mousy robes in the Inn of the Last Home, who instantly tells them that they need to go over the Eastwall Mountains to Zaxxaroth. And so some players just pick that up as their cue and then head directly there. So you're missing a whole lot of the module content if you're solely going into playing them based on the novels themselves. Okay, all that being said, they did return with the Lost Chronicles, which means it's the fill-in gaps that the original Dragonlance Chronicles didn't cover, i.e. DL3 and DL4. So DL3, the heroes are all racing with 800 slaves in a massive caravan, and they're trying to find the gates of Thorbardin so that they can find somewhere to live. But that getting to the actual gates is not the point of DL3. Finding out where the gates are is the point of DL3, and surviving long enough to do so. And this is more challenging than you think, because DL3 is not an overland or dungeon adventure like DL1 and DL2 is. It takes a completely different turn in its approach, and it brings two very specific game systems to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. First and foremost, you deal with the system of attrition, which governs the fate of refugees. It gives the companions an opportunity to actually affect the NPC's likelihood of survival. Because again, you are 800 people with teams of wagons dealing with sparse resources, fleeing Pax Tharkas, and heading into the mountains. And you have no idea where you're going. So you're going to end up where people are going to, and they were slaves. So they were beaten, they were half starved, they weren't taken care of. So you're dealing with people who are just going to die simply because of travel. Again, this is late autumn, not quite winter yet, and you're going through the mountains, which means you're probably going to have a little bit of dusting of snow on the mountains. It's going to be freezing temperatures. These people are not going to be prepared. They're not going to have the food. They're not healthy. They're going to just die from exposure in some cases. So you're going to have a natural attrition that occurs. So you have to think of this module as resource management. And that sounds callous, but that's really what you're dealing with. You're going to lose slaves. You know it because you're fleeing with them through the rugged mountainous terrain. You just want to save as many as you can. So you're going to lose some, but rescue as many as you can. But the natural environment is the only thing hunting you. The Red Dragon Army is on your heels, and so it's a chase game as well. You can't stay in one place too long, otherwise people are going to catch up. And if they catch up, it's going to be ogres, it's going to be draconians, and there's the new draconian that they present in this, the third draconian. So we now have the Bozak, the K-Pack, and the Baz draconians. So you have to deal with a whole lot in this module, not just managing the heroes and their health and magic and all that stuff and traveling terrain, but also a whole bunch of refugees in the process and keeping as many of them alive as possible. That presents a completely different dynamic for most players, especially if you're like a modern gamer. You're used to taking care of number one, you. Chances are, if you're a modern gamer, you've probably never dealt with henchmen in your life. And if you have, you like played an extra character when someone wasn't at the table or something like that. Now, you're not playing all these people, but they are treated basically as henchmen because you're trying to help them move in this impossible situation. So that was the first system that they added. The second system that Tracy Hickman added was a political faction-based system, which helps define how the refugee leaders work with the companions. And this is not as easy as it sounds. There is a percentage chance and situational bonus or negatives to that percentage chance based on what you're asking them to do. Because look, it's 800 different refugees you're dealing with. And they create something called the Council of Freedom, which is 5 people to govern all of those 800 people. So you as the party, you do not have control to say, you go here, you go there. No. You rescued them, but they have their own leadership system. So you have to now deal with the factional leader government. And this council of, where did it go? The Council of Freedom. So you've got Elistan, who is the leader of all the believers. These are the people who believe that Goldmoon brought the gods back after they left at the Cataclysm. You have Lokar, the leader of the Seekers. You have Briar, leader of the Plains people. And you have Brooklyn, leader of the Wood Folk, which are basically half-elves and humans that are friends with elves. And then you have Eben Shatterstone, who ends up being the leader of the Free Peoples. Remember, he's the mercenary that you picked up as you were heading toward the Slaw Mori in DL2. So you've got those 5 different people that you have to deal with. And not only that, you have to convince them of where to go and when to stop and when to eat and etc. You're protecting them when armies attack. You're dealing with attrition when the armies attack. You're doing your best to fight the armies off, get them moving away. And ultimately, it's all through the context of a hex crawl. So again, if you're a modern player, you maybe never have really done a hex crawl before. DL1 and DL2 have already had their hex crawl experiences, so it's a very straightforward system. Basically, you have boundaries in specific areas that when you cross those imaginary boundaries, something occurs there. And then there's always the random monster encounter and stuff like that as well. But you don't know this area as the Heroes of the Lands. No one is familiar with this area. And so you're really just open discovering this place one hex at a time, which is basically a mile at a time, trying to fight off the dragon army that's trying to hunt down and recapture the slaves. You're trying to keep the slaves all alive, and you're trying to fight the leaders to get them to do and tell the people to do what you want them to do in order to save their Tukuses. It's a lot. So there's a lot to really love about this module. Not only are you dealing with Verminaard's Red Dragon and Verminaard himself, they don't make a lot of appearances, but they do. Fizban the Fabulous pops up again. Wonderful. Of course, you have, hopefully, Lorana, Elistan. Eben is still with you from DL2. The new people that you didn't really know before of Lokar, Briar, and Brooklyn. You're going to have to learn who they are in order to learn how to work with them. But the point of this adventure is to find the gates, as I mentioned before, right? In order to do that, there's kind of 2 ways that you can figure some of it out, and most of it is going to lead you to one of the places. So there are steam caverns, like basically abandoned mines, that Agar dwarves, of course, we got to have the Gully dwarves. You have to deal with them again. We dealt with them in DL1. It's a bunch of fun. You're going to deal with them in DL2. It's a bunch of fun. We're going to do it again in DL3. So we're going to deal with the Agar Gully dwarves in order to get some information. But you're also going to have a chance to go to Skullcap. If you remember, that is Fistendanos' old fortress. Now, during the Dwarfgate Wars, he cast a massive spell which exploded Skullcap as he was trying to enter the Abyss so he could confront Takesis. And it did a number of different things, the least of which was destroyed the actual Skullcap fortress itself. So you're going to have to get to find, well, first of all, you got to find Skullcap, deal with all the stuff inside of it. And as you're exploring it, you're going to run across a Shadow Dragon probably. Now, again, there's never been a Shadow Dragon in Dragonlance games up until this point. And I don't actually know, because I've never played through all the modules, whether there is another one again. But I do know, because I'm reading the Daemon trilogy, and of course I've already read the Dragons of a New Age trilogy, that Shadow Dragons were in the 5th Age of Krynn. It's really nice to know that they were at the very beginning of Dragonlance, all the way back here to DL3. That's kind of cool to learn, if you didn't know it already, which I didn't. So you got to deal with the shadow dragon, but you also get to deal with a brass dragon. That's right, a good dragon. And of course, it's, again, I'm telling you guys spoilers, but this is like 40 years old, so I shouldn't have to say it. In any case, the brass dragon is the very first good dragon that anyone is ever going to come across. Remember, the only dragons up to this point that the heroes have come across was Onyx, Matafleur, and Pyros. And they're all bad. They're all mean as hell. And if you ran across the shadow dragon before you run across the brass dragon, you're going to meet another mean dragon. So finally we get to meet a good dragon. And it's a brass dragon. And so you've got to sort of play up the tropes of the loving conversations and loving being around other people and just sort of learning. But again, this person has been trapped since the Dwarfgate War. Like, they don't know anything that's gone on in the past 350 years. Actually, the Dwarfgate War was after that. So, subtract 11 years or something like that. So, it's trapped in this weird stasis for a very long time. His name is Blaze, and he's the actual dragon on the cover there. So you get to meet that dragon, and he'll help you for a little bit, depending on the choices you make. And that depends on how he'll help you. And, what you've done already by the time you run across him. But he can't go with you down into the actual dungeon itself of Skullcap. And Skullcap, while the module presents it as a side view and a top-down view for mapping and moving around for the characters, we are so used to the isometric views that we got in DL1 and DL2, it's a bit of a letdown to see it as just standard flat maps, even though it is a brilliant dungeon for what it's supposed to do. So basically, you go into it, and you have to survive all of the tricks that Fiston Danielis put in place. And it's not easy. Even though it's been blown up, there's still some real dangerous stuff in here. And I cannot wait to run players through this. It's going to be so much fun, because they're going to have to think, not like in Zaxxaroth, where there's a bunch of agar that can help you navigate stuff and give you tricks and tips. And not like in DL2 in Pax Tharkas, where you have a bunch of trapped slaves that can help you and gully dwarves that can help you move around and stuff. No. You're on your own in this, and it's dangerous. It's set up by the most powerful wizard of all time until Raceland comes around of age after the War of the Lance. So it's going to have tricks up its sleeve, and sweet hell does it ever. You're going to have to face off against some incredible odds in this crawl, and it's going to be a traditional dungeon crawl, which is really, really exciting, with all sorts of 3D environments you're going to have to manipulate and move around. Super cool, super cool. But mix that dynamic, which is wildly different from the other dungeon crawls they did in DragonLance thus far, with the resource management of these refugees, which, again, we've never dealt with before, and with the faction issues, which we've never dealt with before. This presents an entirely different style of a module for Dragonlance, and a completely new experience for the players to try to wrap their minds around. It is going to be brilliant, and it's something where it's completely open-ended. Yes, you have to find a way to get to Thorbardin, but there's a couple ways that you can do that, and there's no railroad. You have to just figure it out yourself. That means you could spend all winter wandering around the Kharolis Mountains. I'm sorry, the Kharolis Mountains. And, you may never find it. Of course, you probably will. But, the reality of this is you may end up with no more refugees because they were all killed. You may end up finding it, but then what's the benefit? So you and your party can ultimately get there. And we have a whole lot of characters to deal with, because not only did you pick some up in DL1, you picked some up in DL2, and some of those characters are going to become player characters in DL3. So you're dealing with NPCs like Eben Shatterstone and Lorana. Not a big deal. But you now have the 8 Heroes of the Lance, plus Tika, plus Gilthanas. So that's 10 characters so far. Then you've got to deal with all of the 5 main NPCs that are dealing in the Council of Freedom. between Elistan, Lokar, Briar, Brooklyn, and Eben. Elistan eventually becomes an NPC. Lorana, who is not even named in there, and she's a sort of go-between between you and the Council of Freedom. She's an NPC in this. So that's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 different characters that are named important characters that have to be dealt with on a regular basis through the course of this adventure. That's a tall ask for any group. So if you don't have your typical 8 players that it sort of suggests that you have, that means some players might be managing like 3 different characters. And again, if you're not used to managing henchmen, that could be a tall order. But it does make some suggestions. For example, Goldmoon and Riverwind. Goldmoon should be the main character. Riverwind should be played as a henchman. Raceland and Karaman would be a really good one. Raceland's main character. Karaman's a henchman. Super easy to sort of dynamically play. You could do the same thing, arguably, with Flint and Tasselhoff if you really wanted to. If you want the players to take on Gilthanas, then, I would probably mix up like Gilthanas and Tasselhoff, or maybe Gilthanas and Tika. There's just all sorts of ways that you can try to double up characters depending on how many players you have, so that one single player has multiple styles of play that they can engage in. Some have spellcasting, some of them are fighters, some of them are thieves, and so just sort of mix those all together so each player has a good mix so that they're never just standing around doing nothing. That's kind of the strength of this. And then also just introducing people to this style of gaming, of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons gaming, where it's hex crawls and henchmen, and then true dungeon crawl. So hex crawl, henchman, and dungeon crawl. This is a great way to introduce players in a complex but approachable way to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in so many different aspects. And then also throwing in that faction and attrition system, it just adds a whole new layer of potential play that, depending on this, what the individual player enjoys, something they can really sink their teeth into. You're going to be dealing with 3 different dragons. You're going to be dealing with a freaking lich. You're going to be dealing with dungeons and agar and armies chasing you and ogres and new draconian. And this is dope. This is a dope ass module. That's all I'm saying. I haven't been this excited to run a module since, I was really excited to run Shadow of the Dragon Queen. It just didn't end up being as fun as I wanted it to be. But yeah, since then, I was super pumped to run that. I had some great players going in and out of that campaign. Had a wonderful time running it. And I think this is going to just blow that away as far as diversity of what could happen and how the different players that are going to end up be joining and playing the game, hopefully I'll get 8, how they then approach it and deal with this really interesting hex crawl version. So, of course, we know that the first half of Dragons of Dwarven Depths covers major elements from Dragons of Hope, including the problem with the refugees, the politics of the refugee leaders, and the investigation of Skullcap. However, it doesn't follow the events of the module rigorously, much like the other regular chronicles didn't follow the modules rigorously. And one of the biggest reasons was Verminaard. Now, in Dragons of Autumn Twilight, the heroes kill Verminaard. Spoiler alert. In DL2, they don't. So if you're playing through DL3 or you're writing Dragons of Dwarven Depths, what do? In one of them, Verminaard's dead. In the other one, Verminaard's alive. So what do? Their solution was to have an Draconian looking like Verminaard, faking to be him. And so it was just a really nice creative way to bring Verminaard back without bringing Verminaard back, so that it does still kind of feel like the modules. I thought it was a great solution they came up with, and it was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed it didn't all line up 100% accurately with the Chronicles, but I really enjoyed the Lost Chronicles. It adds a whole lot, especially the second one, High Lord Skies, Dragons of High Lord Skies. Really, really great. All right, so let's see what else. this is the first module that mentions anything about the Dwarfgate Wars as well. So if you've never read the novels, and arguably even if you did, I don't think there's a whole lot about the Dwarfgate Wars in them. So this is of course, DL4 is going to be all about the Dwarfgate Wars because you're in Thorbardin at that point. But up until that point, you're slowly getting this world lore. You're getting lore about Fist and Daedalus. You're like, who the hell is that? What does that mean? No one knows about that. You're getting lore about the Dwarfgate Wars, Flint's family being somehow famous. Flint doesn't even know about this, but the other Nidar dwarves that you run across, they do. They know the Fireforge name. And so it's really great that there's little pieces of what we all know as part of the grand DragonLance Saga, as it were, slowly being disseminated one module at a time. And this is the first time where where Fizban is intended to be the slapstick comedy foil for the group. One way of meeting him, it's not the only way, but one way of meeting him, depending on the decisions of the characters, he's building a snow fort. So he can throw snowballs at the dragon army to stop them. Like literally, that's how you run across him. Just insane. There's another way that it sort of outlines that you can meet him too, which is just silly as well. But I just love the idea of snowball fort. It's so stupid. Like, yeah, of course Fizban would do that. But they tell you directly that you should be using him as the comedy and play that up, because you're in such a grim adventure module where you're trying to save people that are just dying off, that you need some sort of comedic foil to lighten the mood. All the good horror films have comedic moments that undercut the tension, and you really need that in your games too. And DL3 brings that out with Fizban the Fabulous. So I'm very glad that he is doing that as well. One of the criticisms you hear of these modules is the mysterious disappear mechanism. You don't mind it, but what do I think? I think it's the way they built the modules. You have to. If this is going to be a narrative story and you kill off Lorana in DL2, well, she's important later on. You need her later on. And so you have to have they call it an obscure death. So you have to have an obscure death so that when they show up later, they can be like, oh, you guys left me for dead. It took me weeks to heal back up. I finally wandered my way out of that mountain crevasse and then, finally came up here. And that's how I got here. You just have to come up with some excuse. So for example, in the first time I ran DL2, Dragons of Flame, they abandoned Ebon Shatterstone with zombies in the Slaw Mori. But he's in this module. And so his obscure death was them fleeing, abandoning him, closing the doors, and they don't know what happened. Well, his obscure death would have been that he ran away from all the zombies, the opposite direction, went out the entrance of the Slaw Mori, went through and over the mountain pass, which is why it took him so long as the heroes were inside Pax Tharkas fighting that he met them on the other side. So there's always a way that you can sort of correct the death of a character that needs to come back later, as long as you don't have the players staring at their corpse and start stabbing it in the head. Then you can come up with that, whatever you want. So you really enjoy seeing players unfamiliar with the novels play these modules on the channel. Do I have a preference? Great question. No, I don't, because even players who are familiar with it, it seems like they lean into the fun of it. So they'll play on the knowledge of the books as so far as like the history of the characters, but they'll still make their own choices. I think there's only been like one or two times where I think I've run across a player who did exactly what the novel said they did, in the absence of any reason to do it. Like there was no reason given, no justification for the action other than I read this is what happened in the novel, so I'm going to do that. That's really the only time. And it's so rare. Most players, they just want to take ownership of the characters. This is my version of Sturm or my version of Goldman or whatever it is. And so they have fun. And I love that about it because it's written intentionally different from the novels. So own the characters. Don't feel bound by them. Because look, when this was written, for example,
The Staff of Magus was not a Staff of Magus. It was just a staff with a couple spells attached to it. That was it that Raceland carried around. The blue crystal staff, it never changed into regular wood. It was just a blue crystal staff that you had to cover up and hide because it was obvious what it was. The Disc of Mishakal, which is a huge MacGuffin in DL1, is entirely absent in DL2. Doesn't even come again until DL3. And you have to wonder, wait a second, that's weird. Why? I still don't know the answer. They just didn't bring it back until DL3. So there's little bits like that you just kind of have to go with because they were having different writers and different game designers put these modules together, and the novels were informed by the modules, but they went off in their own little tangents. And so when the writers like Tracy Hickman came back to do a module after already having written the book, he had to do it differently, but he had all the knowledge from the novel in his mind as he was doing the module. And so he was trying to sort of do some it seemed, he was doing some retroactive story building and stuff at the same time. So it's this huge, weird mishmash of events, objects, and story beats that you have to let the players just sort of find their own way through it to make it fun, not only for you, but most importantly for them, you know? Gabe, how you doing, man? You're curious if the PC's henchmen followed slightly different rules or if they're actually PCs being played. It's really just like PCs being played, but they're just treated like henchmen because one person is telling them what to do. It's really that, like, just like that. When you get DL5, you should play War of the Lands computer game. Well, we should finish it. And then once we finish our game, I need to run that board game. And it's not DL5, it's DL11, the Dragons of Glory. But I do really want to finish and do that. It's just, it takes so long to do. It's just a big thing. DL5 is actually Dragons of Mystery, which is the very first source book for Dragonlance. So DL5 Dragons of Mystery, it gives you errata for the different modules that came out 1 through 4. It gives you what you should expect a typical game session, where you should get in each module based on that game session. So it states pretty clear that each module should only take 4 sessions to get through. And your sessions are around 4 to 6 hours usually. I usually run them 4 hours. And each time I've run DL1 and DL2, I've finished it in the 4 hours in 4 sessions. So 16 hours total. And I'm on path to do that in DL2 this run around as well. And DL3 is the same. You should be able to finish it in 4 sessions. So if it's 4-hour sessions. So I'm looking forward to seeing if that holds up or not. And I'm going in and adding the errata and stuff because a lot of it's hit point issues, which are huge problems. Some of it is like armor for Gold Moon. You sort of have to like hand wave away. But they say the stats in DL5 are the ones that you should always use as the canon stats because it's the accurate stats. And it's sort of just when they were putting Dragonlance together, they had something it was basically like the story Bible. Well, that is DL5, Dragons of Mystery. So they did the first 4 books, which is the first novel. And then as they were, sort of putting together the next novel and next modules, they just packaged their source material and released it as its first source book for Dragonlance. So you didn't have the Test of High Sorcery yet. You didn't have the moons and their power yet. All that, those sort of tropes were later. We were just told that Raceland went through a test. We were told there was multiple moons, but there's no game mechanic presented to have that have any meaning at all. And so players typically bring that with them, and they're probably a little underwhelmed when I'm not running it because I'm running it as it was released. And so Rangers are not as tough because Unearthed Arcana hadn't been released yet. Unarmed Combat is a little bit more challenging because we're using the percentile dice system in the Dungeon Master's Guide rather than the polyhedron dice version or the 20-sided dice version in the Unearthed Arcana. And there's just little game systems that just didn't exist in AD&D that later were added to Dragonlance. So it is a bit of a different experience, but I'm having a blast, and I think the players are having fun. So what are you going to do? You're battling 1,000 today in memory. You hope the battle with Verminaard is as epic as the novel. Well, they don't fight him in this. They're going to run across him, and they'll probably throw some spells and stuff, but it's not a to-the-death battle. It's basically a timed event. And there's a couple of them. So he's just meant to be a looming threat, not a big boss battle. Fist and Danilus is your big boss battle. And even that's a timed event too. So it's really just the dungeon of Skullcap that's the huge epic conclusion to this module. And I can't wait to run it. All right, so those are my thoughts on DL3. Have you guys ever run this before? If you did, how did it turn out? Did you deal with the attrition system and the political system? Did you enjoy that, or was it too much of a burden? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. Let's run it. And if you haven't run it and you want to, stay tuned because I am going to be running it if you're interested. I'll put links in all the social stuff and in the community page of this YouTube channel as well when that's coming. It's not going to be for a couple more, probably for like 2 more months or something like that, but it's in the mail. So, all right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. That's it for my review of DL3 Dragons of Hope by Tracy Hickman. What do you think of having shadow dragons in Dragonlance? Did you know it went all the way back to DL3? Are you excited to see this run as a traditional hex crawl and traditional dungeon crawl, which is, again, stark contrast to DL1 and DL2? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. You can always email me at info@dlsaga.com as well. Thank you to creator patrons Aaron Hardy and D. Robert Handy, producer patron David Galindo, developer patron Chris Androu and Sam Ruiz, and all of the YouTube members. I would also like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, ring the bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. It all goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. And this channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the Dragonlance Saga. I hope you'll join that celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been Adam with DragonLance Saga, and until next time, Slanchavar.